Hey, this is Adam Torres, and I'm here to tell you that it has never been easier to start your very own podcast. At Mission Matters, our goal is to amplify stories that matter. That means we want to help you start your podcast because your story matters. We can do this in 3 different ways. 1, join our podcast school and take a free or paid course. 2, visit our resources page where we've already figured out what you need, such as where to host your podcast. Or 3, heck, we can even do everything for you through our podcast agency, including editing for cheaper than you can do in-house. Oh, and no contracts, service is month to month. Get started by heading over to missionmatters.com and click on Start a Podcast. All right, now let's get into the show. Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Mission Matters Business Podcast, your source for all things business. My name is Adam Torres. You can follow me on Instagram at AskAdamTorres. Keep up with my book releases, book tour schedule, signings, all that other good stuff. Always love to connect with you there. And as always, if you'd like to apply to become a co-author of one of my upcoming books, just head on over to the website, missionmatters.com, and click on Become an Author to apply. All right, so today I have Alain Hunkins on the line, and he's founder and CEO over at Hunkins Leadership Group, and he's also author of Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. Alain, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Adam. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
All right, so for my longtime listeners, as you already know, I love talking about books, and I love helping authors sell books, so I'm excited to bring Alain on the show today to talk about cracking the leadership code and, you know, why the listeners should go out and get it. It was really easy to find on Amazon, by the way, so I just literally typed in cracking the leadership code, came right up. I don't think you're going to have any problems finding this book. It's out there everywhere. But so, Alain, before we get into the book, I do want to give the audience a little bit of a feel for your background, so tell us a little bit more about how you got started in your career and in business.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. You know, I certainly didn't start at 6-year-old thinking I was going to be a leadership consultant and an author. It's not the kind of thing that you do. So for me, though, if I look back, the common thread, I've always been really interested in people. What inspires people? I come from a family of professional musicians. My dad's family and my grandparents were all musicians. I played the violin for 13 years, and then I went on and became a professional actor. And then I got into the world of leadership. So you might think, well, those are kind of disparate things, but the common thread is that leadership, violin, theater, it's all a performing art. And I believe that what great leaders do is they move people and they inspire people to do things. And so I got into this because I recognized in myself I was a high-achieving person, but being a high-achieving person is not the same as being a high-achieving leader. And so what inspired me was realizing it was a whole different set of skills that make great leaders stand out from other people. And I wanted to be that person, and I figured the best way to become that person was to study it and then to start to teach other people on how to be it.
Man, what a great story. And I think that's also a great transition. So let's just dive right into the book. So Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. So first off, what was the inspiration for this?
Yeah, so the book I didn't sit down to write the book so much as the book came out of working with literally thousands of groups of leaders. I think I've worked with over 2,500 groups of leaders in the last 23 years all around the world, 25 countries. And what I started to notice were there were patterns of behavior. It turns out that all great leaders do certain things in common. And all lousy leaders do certain things in common. And I try to figure out what's the difference. And I started taking notes. And those notes turned into blog posts. And those blog posts turned into chapters. And those chapters ended up becoming what is now the subtitle of the book, The 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. And I'll reveal the secrets. Here's the big reveal. The first big secret to being a great leader is you've got to connect. So it's about connection. Then once you connect, second secret is communication, because communication is at the heart of any kind of effective leadership. And then the third big secret is collaboration. Once you communicate, how are you going to work with other people and create an environment where people can perform and achieve things at their best? So the book emerged out of literally being out in the field, working with, coaching, and training leaders and seeing the patterns. And the book is filled with not just here's a bunch of principles, but also it's filled with stories, because let's face it, no one wants to read a bunch of theory. Everyone wants stories to bring the principles and theories to life and not just do all these things, but let's take a look at what are the things that are going to get in your way. because leadership is a lot easier said than done. In my research, I found that only 3% of people believe that leaders lead well, which means there is a huge room for improvement. And so the book is really designed as a guide, a practical roadmap to help people to accelerate their leadership learning curve and become the leaders that they aspire to be.
So in the book, and by the way, I love the way the book is laid out for the audience. I mean, at part 1, context; part 2, connection; part 3, communication; part 4, collaboration. I mean, it's laid out very well, very digestible. It makes things really systematic in terms of how you digest the information. And we're not going to have, for the listeners, we're not going to have time to go into the entire book. But even if we did, we wouldn't, because why? I want you to go out there and buy this. It's so easy. Just go on Amazon, put it in there, and pick up a copy. Especially if you're thinking about how it makes sense for you and what you want to think about your leadership style going forward. And one of the things that stuck out to me in the book was chapter 3. So why old school leadership stopped working? To me, like, there's some people that hear that title right now and they're like, wait a minute, old school leadership works or this, that. What are your views on this, Alain? I want to get your feel for this. And in my opinion, your somewhat controversial title to that chapter.
Old school. Well, it's interesting. Well, let me first of all define school a little bit. When I talk about old school, we're talking about the old top-down command and control style leadership, which is all about do this because I'm your boss and I decide on your paycheck. That's why, which is kind of a variation that a lot of us heard as kids and teenagers, right? Because I'm your dad, that's why,
because
right?
I said so.
Because I said so. And that's a good enough reason, exactly. So here's the thing. That worked up until a point. That worked when we had an industrial age where workers were literally interchangeable pairs of hands on an assembly line. 95% of the workforce was doing manual factory labor. That is not the world we live in. And so why old school leadership has stopped working? There have been 3 major trends that have shifted not just the workplace, but our society. Number 1, computerization, right? The digitization of work and the world has made information accessible to everyone. See, it used to be in the old school leadership model is that the leaders hoarded all the information and they spoon-fed it out a little bit at a time to people. Well, that world is gone. Now, with equal access to information, the playing field has been leveled. So that is number 1. Number 2 is that we have so many more choices than we ever did before. 50 years ago, if you didn't like your job, it was really hard to figure out what else was out there, and is the grass really greener? So this links to number 1 with computerization. Between things like LinkedIn and Glassdoor, everyone knows where the grass is greener, and people aren't afraid to hop the fence. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has found that the average tenure for employees aged 25 to 34 is only 2.8 years. So today, job hopping is the new normal. And the third big reason why old school leadership has stopped working has to do with the fact that people aren't going to settle. And we talked about digitization, we talked about choices, but the third thing is about transparency. The fact is everyone with their cell phone is now a frontline journalist. I mean, you might remember just a few years ago when a passenger was dragged off a United Airlines flight because he refused to give up his seat voluntarily, and it was filmed by another passenger. And it turned into this giant debacle. United Airlines market cap lost something like $8 billion in 48 hours from that incident. So this idea of there's so much more transparency. So leaders need to raise their game because everything you do and say shows up, and everything you don't do and don't say shows up. So our expectations for what we want from our leaders have changed. So if you try to be that old school because I said so command and control leader, you are stuck in a 20th century mindset and you're living in a 21st century world, and you are destined to struggle and probably fail pretty soon.
Man, that's great advice, and I think that's a great segue to another part that I found interesting in the book. So, communication. That's a big theme. You spend some time on an entire section. So, cracking the communication code. Tell us a little bit more about what that looks like.
Sure. So, I said before, communication is the heart of all effective business relationships. And we'd all say it's important. However, it's easier said than done. And the big reason why is because most people take effective communication for granted. They assume, hey, I've got ears that hear, I have a mouth that works, I have fingers that type and eyes that can read. It's kind of like your internet service. You don't think about it a whole lot until it's not working. And by then it's too late. So when it comes to communication, the biggest challenge is for communication to be truly effective, we have to align three major components. It's what do you say versus what do you mean and what do I hear? And most of the time, those three things are not aligned, which means people are walking away with misunderstanding or misunderstanding. Because the whole goal of effective communication isn't communication itself. It's to create shared, accurate understanding. And the reason that understanding is so important is because accurate understanding becomes the platform on which we base all future action. In other words, if we have a solid foundation built on understanding, we can make great decisions to create great results. But if our platform is rickety and unstable because we have misunderstanding, we're going to make poor decisions and get poor results. And so I look throughout the book and in my work at what are the things that get in the way of accurate understanding and what are the tools that we can use to make sure that we get it. So I'll just share a couple of each. So one thing that gets in the way of accurate understanding is what we call confirmation bias. It's the ability that we tend to assume that whatever we think is the way it is, and we look for that in the outside environment to reinforce what we already think, because that's what we think already. So that's a simple example of what goes on. Another one is that what psychologists call the projection bias, is where you unconsciously assume that other people have the same exact thoughts and feelings that you do. So if you've ever caught yourself saying, well, I sent them the email, they should know what to do. That's an example of that. It's like, well, you know what you meant, but they may not. So a simple tool that anyone can use is something I call asking for a receipt. Like we all have meetings. We have business meetings all the time, whether they're in groups or one-on-one. And so often the meeting ends and we haven't stopped and asked for a receipt of understanding or checked in to make sure what are the next steps. And I'm sure we've all had the experience of what we call the meeting after the meeting. So, hey, Adam, what did we just agree to in that meeting? Well, I'm not sure. What do you think? And then we all have different versions of the same story, right? We all know what that's like. So instead of doing that, by asking for a receipt, end your meeting 10 minutes earlier or end the content portion and then say, hey, these last 10 minutes, just to make sure we're on the same page, let's just recap. Let's go around the table. So, Adam, what did you say you're going to do? Just make sure we spell it out. And that way we catch it while we're all together. And then we can go off and take the next step actions. So there are simple, practical tools like that that start to accelerate your ability to become a more effective communicator and a better leader.
Man, what a great idea. And I love it because it's very actionable, it's tangible, and you can see that it'll get you results immediately if you do it. So I love it. It's great. And that's one of the things I like about your book is it's just very systematic in it. And it's obvious that you've worked with, 2,500 or 2,000 plus, whatever the number was in terms of organizations and the amount of leaders that you've worked with. So that's awesome. So Ella, I can talk to you first off about this subject all day long, but we're about out of time for this episode. So if somebody is watching this or listening to this and they want to learn more about your book or how to connect with you and your team overall, I mean, what's the best way for them to reach out and to do that?
Sure. Easiest place to find me is start at the book website, which is spelled exactly as the same as the title. It's www.crackingtheleadershipcode.com. That'll take you right to the book page. You can learn all about the book. You can download the first chapter. You can also find links to buy it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and IndieBound. That will take you also linked directly to my AlainHunkins.com website, where you can learn all about the training, coaching, speaking, and consulting work I do. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. That tends to be my social media platform of choice. And if you have any questions about anything, you can also email me and my team right at support@AlainHunkins.com. And we answer all questions that people have about leadership, because our mission is all about helping people to become the leaders they aspire to be.
Fantastic. Well, Alain, really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing more about all your background, and wishing you continued success with your book. So Cracking the Leadership Code, to all my listeners, definitely go check that out. It was really easy to find, and now you have the website too. Alain, just one more time, the website, just in case everybody listening, they're like, I didn't have a pen. I got to find a pen. Where do I do this? What's that website? One more time, please.
Sure. Website at www.crackingtheleadershipcode.com. Just like it's spelled.
Perfect. And to the listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. Don't forget, if this is your first time listening or watching, hit the subscribe button. Want to have you back here to hear some more interviews, have some other great guests lined up. And if you're watching this on YouTube, definitely leave us some comments in the video. I'd love to know what kind of projects and things that you're working on. Let's continue the conversation over in our YouTube community. And Alain, thanks again for coming on.
Adam, thank you. It's been my pleasure.